Good evening, everyone. What a great crowd. This is really super. Tonight, I think we have a topic that will interest a whole lot of people. If you have a house, or you are renovating a house, or you are building a house, that probably includes a whole lot of people. My name is Pat Brown, and I am the Dean of Arts and Sciences here at UAS, and I welcome you here this evening. This is a great turnout. I'm really pleased this evening to introduce Markham George. Markham is, where are you, Markham? There he is. He slipped off to the back and scared me. He is a associate professor at UAS, and he coordinates the construction technology program. He also works in coordinating applied building research and technology with the tribal housing and industry professionals in the area. Markham serves as a research committee chair for the Cold Climate Housing Research Center. He is a regional project manager for the Building America program in Alaska, and he is a member of the national committee that sets standards on indoor air quality for residential buildings. So I would like you to join with me and welcome Markham, and we'll get on with the program. Sure. Before we start, there's one thing I wanted to mention, is that we record these so that they can be aired later. So when we get to the point where you want to ask questions, please wait for me to get you the microphone. Otherwise, we never pick you up, no matter how loud you shout. Okay? So, okay, with that, let's go, Markham.
Appreciate it. Wow. I didn't think many people would show up tonight with the newspaper today and oil going down and kind of our energy going up usage. So, thanks. Appreciate it. You know, kind of look over the last couple of years, and there's been so much effort in renewable energy technologies. I mean, that's the buzz out there. Everybody wants to have renewable power. I think it's super. But there's not a lot of talk about conservation, deep energy reduction in existing buildings, and you know, that's really where the savings is. I mean, once you use less, renewable energy is going to make it more meaningful and more cost effective. I mean, who wants to spend, where you have sun, $40,000 on a solar array? That's a lot of money. Versus spending $40,000 on conservation maybe, and then having a lot more choices as far as the systems that you plug into your buildings. So I'm going to really talk about energy usage, energy efficiency, and conservation tonight. I'm not going to address widgets, compact fluorescent lights, appliances. I don't think that's our best move right now. We've probably done that. We've probably done a lot of that already. I think it's time that we change our behavior. Is going to be the first thing, to think beyond what we've ever done before with insulation and our structures, and to get down to real low energy usage. All over, there's a lot of talk about zero energy buildings, net zero energy buildings. I don't believe we're ever going to get zero energy or net zero energy buildings in Southeast Alaska. Perhaps other parts of Alaska, it's possible. But easily we can get reductions of over 50% of your energy bills right now. 50 to 70% I think are doable right now. And I think it's cost effective even right now. Well, at least I did a week or two ago. As energy keeps going lower, I'm going to tell you, you know, people are going to hedge their bets. They're going to look at their pocketbook right now, and that's a lot of the problems we've been doing. Almost everything we do in the building industry is first-time costs, and it's not the long-term costs that we're all paying for now. I mean, wouldn't you like it that if your mortgage was $50 more per month, but your energy bills were 60% less? I think that's where we're looking at. You know, it's inevitable that we fight this all the time because so much of what we do is geared for the industry to produce and not to reduce. So that's where I'm going to go. And boy, I hope with a turnout like this, November 14th, I'm pretty excited about what Greg Brown can share with us as far as energy solutions outside of oil for Southeast Alaska. So I hope you'll be here for that too. Oh, you know, there's a lot of folks that call me up and they say, my house sucks. Yeah, your house does suck. My house sucks too. Because you have all these devices inside the building and they're usually drawing on something. You know, your boiler, your wood stove, fans, but you know, energy losses are there. I think we all know where we feel stuff, we see stuff, and it doesn't always have to be the monthly statement from the fuel or power company. It's sitting by a window or sitting by another part of the house that gives you perhaps a little bit of discomfort, or maybe you visually see discomfort. It's discomforting because there's green stains, or who knows what happens in houses. They're all so different. You know, construction defects abound in our buildings, and they aren't necessarily code violations. You know, the building code, I think, primarily is looking at health and safety issues, and that's a good thing. But there's so many other issues that come back to us and our buildings on a regular basis. A lot of these things you can see. You're just walking around the house or driving outside buildings, you see frost lines or no frost lines, or you see ice coming out of floors or windows. You know, I like that. I think that's pretty exciting, actually, when you see a house that's trying to inflate itself, and you know, it's big. I know that's a good one too. You know, ice dams. I love ice dams. Luckily, I don't have them on my house, but I really like it when they're on other people's buildings. And I take pictures of it. And people call me up and say, you know, you should go down this street. There's a great ice dam there right now. So that's kind of fun. Some defects you never see, like the bottom right. It's a plumbing vent in a wall. It's an interior wall. A lot of these defects you don't see or experience until there's a moisture imbalance, that something's been triggering in a building and it finally crosses the threshold of tolerance, and then you might see something or something falls apart. Sometimes you might not sit by a wall because there's air coming out of an interior wall outlet, or who knows what. There's so many things that happen in buildings, and our buildings are unique just like us. Like that, I've always wanted to use the opening sentence from Anna Karenina, and I figured that Egan's the perfect place for me to get that opportunity. You know, I lay awake at night thinking, boy, where can I use Anna Karenina? So, you know, this is kind of tied to a description I use of where we are in housing, and I describe it as lots of luck. You know, we have, the majority of our buildings are built by just a handful of building companies around the country. And these building companies, you know, they build hundreds of thousands of buildings. And when you make a design, you might do 25, 50,000 of that year. And it doesn't matter where it goes. I mean, we live in the age of the cul-de-sac. And you can plop down buildings anywhere, anytime, and they're all supposed to act and respond the same. I don't see that happening that way. You put holes in it for ventilation, or a flue in it for combustion gases, or who knows what you're doing in a building. And now you just start turning it at all sorts of angles, and you expect it to perform the same under different wind regimes. It doesn't always work that way. So that is a lot of luck, or lots of luck. And the same thing it comes with, well, our building materials change, and the moisture tolerance of our building materials change. We might build in a really wet year. We might have a really wet lot. Who knows how they are as we move through the building process. So just like all families are unique, all buildings are unique. And because one building might work fine here, it might not work fine down the street, or with a different set of occupants living in it. I mean, it's a precarious balance that our buildings are working in. And particularly in an environment like Southeast Alaska, this is one wicked tough environment for wood frame buildings to survive. I mean, you really have to appreciate the designers and the builders of Southeast Alaska, because if they weren't as good as they are, they'd be falling down far faster. Well, I'm not finished borrowing yet. You might know this story as the Brothers Grimm. I'm going to call it the Grimm Brothers, because it's part of our building history, where we go with buildings, and the saga of unintentional consequences. The best of intentions sometimes don't work real well. But with hindsight, they become a little clearer. But we keep moving forward with very little research in buildings. and we just work off of experience of what's worked previously. And we make changes on a regular basis and hoping that they're all going to work without a flaw. Often they do, but occasionally they don't work that well. So this is a quick little journey into where we are now. A lot of you have heard this. This is you probably know this as Little Red Riding Hood. In a lot of the classes I do, this is the feel-good part of the show. Grandma had a shack out North Douglas. You know, her main criteria was to put some fresh Visqueen on the cabin every once in a while, because if she could keep it dry, she could sure keep it up, and it worked real well for her. And I mean, son of a gun, how could you get a better spot than North Douglas? You got a lot of firewood, you got water, you got privacy, and you got a place like this that Grandma can call home. And it was great. Well, Grandma had that great little Red Riding Hood, and Red used to love to come see Grandma. And they'd pick flowers and tea parties. You know, all the things grandmas and little girls do. And things were great. Grandma's house was pretty great, too. It was a little leaky, but with abundance of firewood, she was able to control temperature and comfort really well. And if she wanted to regulate humidity, she could put a pot of water on that stove. And, you know, things worked really well. And they worked even better when Grandma was young. And as Grandma got older, it became much more of a task to get the firewood. And it was a lot of work. And so she'd ask Red, oh, Red, after tea today, let's go get a couple pieces of firewood for Granny tonight so she doesn't get cold. And, you know, Red would do that. But, you know, it kept getting that Grandma wasn't able to keep up with the firewood. And she'd ask Red to do more firewood. And pretty soon she said, Red, couldn't you bring a friend or two because we could hump more firewood? You know, Red didn't like humping firewood at all. She liked picking flowers and tea parties and all sorts of stuff. And Grandma loved Red enough, so she switched over to oil. She was never going to ask Grandma Red to ever hump a piece of firewood again. You know, that worked really well for a long time because oil was dirt cheap. And as long as that the oil truck didn't go far, things were good. You know, you got a little wicked every once in a while. You had to kind of angle the tank so you got every last drop. And, you know, this kept working really well. It was a fine balance you had there. And, well, it started getting more expensive. And what was Grandma to do? Well, Grandma just wasn't, asleep at the rocking chair all the time. She'd been paying attention. She knew about the house of tomorrow. She wanted the house of tomorrow. You know, and just like the rest of us, the house of tomorrow is right where our hearts are all the time. So Grandma called the contractor because he had an ad in the paper and said, 40% energy savings. Let me come and insulate your house. So sure as heck, Grandma called and said, you know, I saw that house tomorrow. I want some of that. So the contractor came and he put insulation in the floor. He put insulation in the walls. He put insulation in the ceiling. Said, Grandma, man, you got some resistance to heat flow here. This is going to work so well for you. You're going to heat this place on a candle. You know, Grandma knows that the place held heat a whole lot better than it ever had before. She thought this is working pretty good. You know, Grandma noticed a couple things, though, that every thaw that she had water coming out of her ceiling. And every once in a while, she'd have water in her light fixtures in her ceiling. You know, and Grandma, you know, she wasn't a builder or anything, but she could poke her head up in the attic and she said, you know, there's a lot of frost up here. I never had frost up in my attic before. Wonder what's going on. I got all these leaks. So Grandma started putting buckets all over her attic, catching the water. And it only happened in the spring, so it wasn't a big deal. Grandma knew when she had to put new buckets up, where to empty them. She had a balance going. But this wasn't real good. She called it. She saw another ad in the paper. This guy knew more about super insulation. So he came on out and he put a vapor retarder in because the code had realized that, you know, insulation alone, particularly in a cold climate, doesn't do you always the best because you don't have air tightness and you have that frost going on. So builder came around and he put Visqueen all over the walls, all over the ground, all over the ceiling. You know, Grandma had a sister that lived in Florida. She was going through the same thing, and her contractor put the Visqueen all over the outside of the house. You know, that's right, because the vapor retarder always goes on the warm side of dew point. So if you're down in the south, it goes on the outside, and if you're up north, it goes on the inside. And sure as heck, it was working pretty good. Grandma didn't have any more leaks coming out of the ceiling ever again. She couldn't see out her windows. That's all she was doing. She was putting towels down in front of every window because they were soaking wet. What she didn't have was gutters in front of her windows, and that would have helped. You know, but after a while, she couldn't see Red coming, and she didn't really care because she had so much mold in the house that, you know, she didn't know who Red was. She didn't know who she was anymore. But, you know, she had an energy-efficient house that she could heat with just candles, and, you know, she figured that's just part of living in tomorrow. She called the contractor back and, you know, said, you know, it's great. I can sure heat. My heating bill's gone down. My electric bill's gone way up drying these towels, though. You know, you got any ideas that'll work? And sure as heck, he goes, you know, we should put a fan in here. If we put a fan in here, we could probably get some of this moisture out. Well, that's a pretty good idea, but, you know, it was October when he was over there doing it. It was PFD time. You know, every time PFD time comes, there's sales on about everything possible. So while he was there, he was putting in a clothes dryer, and, you know, Grandma had looked at the Juneau quite a bit, and she had always had her heart set on a Juneau because, well, that's like the stove delight. So she put that in, she put the clothes dryer, she put the the bathroom exhaust fan in, and wow, the moisture did go down. She could see out the windows. It was doing a little bit better. But she was backdrafting so much now she had carbon monoxide poisoning in her house. And now she's got all these fans going. The house is just like sucking on a balloon. I mean, it's pulling out from every conceivable gap through the outside of the building. And it wasn't working real well. You know, we don't have a big problem with the backdrafting. You know, oil, you can smell it pretty easily. You know, natural gas, that's a whole different animal if you have a natural gas appliance in your backdrafting because you can't smell that one. That one's kind of a real danger signal. But wood stoves most certainly give a lot of folks some problems around the southeast because you can smell that really easy, right? That's a smell that lingers on. And, you know, when you have folks that picture on the upper left, that wood stove was running when I took that picture, and that flue wasn't connected. There's all sorts of things that people don't notice in buildings, and maybe because they've been down the same path that Grandma has, and they're just not as sharp as they used to be. Well, finally the contractor got to the program, and he took that old oil boiler out, and he put in a new oil boiler that took combustion air from the outside. So we had no more competing airflows in the house for combustion. So now the flue gases are ducted to the outside, and the combustion air comes right into the burner. Also put in an exhaust fan that had a humidistat in there so it could regulate ventilation or based on humidity in the building. And that helped a lot. And since Grandma still had that Gin Air, he put a fan in that would now bring in outdoor air to replace this big fan that was exhausting in the building to kind of put the building a little bit more in balance. So the fan on the right didn't come on until the big downdraft stove was activated. So it only came on when you're exhausting the same amount of air. And that worked pretty well. This is a story of where we've just been over the last couple generations. Is that we really haven't been looking at the interconnection and the thought process of the systems approach. And the systems approach is what we describe as recognizing that as you take on components or measures to save energy, you have to also recognize that it has implications both positive and negatively to impact building durability, moisture, combustion safety, and indoor air quality. So it's looking at, as you start changing out a heating system to something else, or you're adding fans in the building, that you're starting to change the heat, air, and moisture balance in the building. And we really need to get this interaction connected and understand it so that when we make a decision, we're seeing how it works in the whole. And that hopefully as we make a change, it's also helping a number of other processes in that whole system. And slide too. So the impact of housing, huh? We got a couple houses out there. 74 million almost in the United States. What's that? 107 million total dwelling units in the United States as of, what is that, 2001. Using over 20 trillion BTUs of energy. That's a fair chunk. Now, you know, in Juneau, we have about 4,800 homes, single-family homes. We have about 1,200 mobile homes. And I'm going to use a real conservative number here. If every home in Juneau required 20 BTUs of energy per square foot in order to hit their design temperature in the winter. So come January, February, March, when it's cold, the amount of heat you need to reach comfort. You know, some of the houses I've measured in Juneau are about 90 BTUs per square foot. Some are 65, some are 40. Our newer ones are probably down about 20. So I'm going to use 20 BTUs. If you require 20 BTUs per square foot, your building is using about 60 million BTUs every year for net heat. That's a lot of BTUs. I think we need to start thinking about a different component other than just dollars and cents, and start looking at how the energy is going to impact us and the region and the planet. So we're using a bunch of energy. In the United States, this is 20% of the total energy consumption in houses, residential buildings. Transportation, 27. We're right about those same numbers. I think we're about 25% in Juneau. About 23% is transportation. I believe the commercial range is about the same as residential energy consumption here in Juneau. You know, in 2007, AOMP shared some numbers with me. Their sales were 340 million kilowatt hours in Juneau. And we're just not alone. It shouldn't just be a topic for Juneau. It should be a discussion for Southeast Alaska. Sitka has about 9,000 citizens and about 3,600 homes. They've reached capacity of their Blue Lake hydro. And so now they're looking at, and they're not looking, they're going. They're going for an 83-foot tall extension to the Blue Lake Dam. And they need the capacity. They're hoping to come online with us between 2015 and 2017. Now, I don't know what an 83-foot tall extension to a dam is going to cost, but I think it's going to take some money. And as the utility engineer told me over there, the dam itself is just one aspect. You need to upgrade all the transmission lines, and you need to upgrade all the transformers too. The last 4 years in Sitka, their energy consumption has gone up 30%. Now, our utilities make their profits from sales, and I don't fault them for that. But there's no incentive that I'm seeing for utilities to go for conservation and reduce their sales, right? That's going to reduce their profit. So if I just look at Sitka and say, wow, here we have this, I don't know, maybe $100 million. I don't know what it would cost. I'm going to throw out $100 million, and that's just a wag on my part. But if I take the 3,600 homes in Sitka, and if you let me design a retrofit for them and reduce their power consumption by 50%, I can do that for $60 million. Now, $60 million is still money. But doesn't that start leading down the path as far as conservation, that we have to work together more than just the individuals and more than just the municipality, but working also with the utilities so that we work together in a planning? And I think that's something we need to work regionally. And maybe Southeast Conference could be a help there, that we don't want to take profit away from a utility. I mean, they need to keep their investment up. But if we could also incorporate conservation, there's a number of other states that the utilities are driving. And I think it's tied to a lot to utility deregulation, that you now take free market utility pricing. And if we could now take that path on, we might be able to now have the best of both worlds. Climate change. Bill Leedy shared with me some numbers he's been playing with for Juneau. And it's the internal energy usage of Juneau versus the external. And the external would include Alaska Airlines, Alaska Marine Highway, and the cruise lines, the cruise ships coming to Juneau. Without all of those, Bill said about 10 million gallons of heating oil each year is used in Juneau. 10 million gallons, I'm using 22.4 pounds of CO2 gases per gallon of heating oil. You're looking at about 224 million pounds of greenhouse gases emitted from Juneau each year for the heating process. And that doesn't include the 1 million gallons of propane used, which would add another 12 million pounds of CO2. America has 5% of the population. We consume 25% of the energy produced each year. Taking our 5% population, the U.S. buildings account for 42% of the greenhouse gases emitted each year in the United States. Boy, you know, we have a whole bunch of buildings out there. In 2006, $228 billion was spent on home improvements in the United States. It'd be nice to know how much of that was put toward energy efficiency versus the things that we probably spend on our houses. The median age of a house in the United States is 34 years old. And 60% of those houses will still be lived in 2050. We've got to do something about the energy requirements. In Juneau, our median age is also 34 years. 1974 is the median age of Juneau houses. And so we have about 50% of our houses that are probably pretty energy intensive. And 2x4 walls, single and double pane windows. There's a whole lot of potential improvements there to reduce the energy consumption of those buildings. In the United States, we're probably looking at 58 million buildings, residential buildings, that need a deep energy retrofit. I don't know if deep energy retrofit's the right term to use. That's one that's being bandied about right now by a bunch of groups and committees around the country, and it's called the 1,000 Home Challenge. And another one is the Starting from Home Challenge of trying to take on and bring forward conservation versus where we have been going. It sure hasn't been conservation on the structures themselves. Worse than our consumption, it's the size of our houses. They keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You know, our average house, 2,400 and some odd square feet, 2.5 bathrooms. We're putting in so many electric appliances, so many different exhaust devices. We just can't stop. At what point is enough or sufficiency? I saw something on the New York Times a few months ago, and it said, what is a new trophy house? And it said small and energy efficient. Well, I guess we need to know what, and to redefine maybe what energy efficient is. I hope it isn't a 4-star plus, a 5-star house or something like that. Putting stars on houses doesn't really give you a true measure of efficiency. You have to measure energy consumption. That's the only way you really look at a building, and you now know if it's energy efficient. So that's a measure we have to do, better commissioning, better measuring to see where we can take some reductions and find out how this will work for us. This bothered a lot of us when this came out a couple of years ago, wondering why we are so down. We're 35 states ahead of us use more energy on a state level than Alaska. I mean, we're not that bad. I guess we don't have as many houses, as many people. But when it comes to per capita, we're number one. We're number one by about, We're way up there, huh? I mean, you know, we got Louisiana. Oh, it's Wyoming. It's number 2, another little wild card of a state. But we spend 25% more energy per capita than even the citizens of Wyoming. We need to change the way we look at our building codes. I mean, our building codes, and it's just not Juneau, it's anywhere I look within the state of Alaska. They were written and not updated long ago. They need to be updated. They need to come forward and to see where we're going. This is our scorecard. We're number 41, and it's really, we have to use 51 here because the District of Columbia is included in this. So we're number 41. We earned 5 total points available out of 44 as far as a state energy efficiency scorecard by the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. You know, what this tells me, we have to redo and rethink our building codes, what we demand, and I'm thinking of energy efficiency, not health and safety. I think health and safety does a great job. But energy efficiency, measuring energy, commissioning buildings, education for the building industry and the occupants, the building owners, and more incentives. I think it's going to take incentives to change this. You know, right now we've got a lot of incentives in the state. We're going to spend a lot of money, but it's not going to be enough. We need to go even further. Just a year or so ago, I think I asked for $3.5 billion And that was just the material cost to retrofit every building in Alaska. So, you know, we're probably talking $7 or $8 billion to get buildings down to where I think they should be. That's a fair chunk of money. When I told that to my dean, she said, if I see one of my faculty in the paper saying to rob the permanent fund, you know, that wasn't what she was hoping for. But, you know, I think that it's a very wise decision is to invest in our citizens and our state. And if I was in charge, I would be going to rural Alaska first and bringing the energy down. I mean, we have to do something for rural Alaska. That is wicked tough. You know, but you got to feel good. I mean, Juneau is one of the top 3 recognized case studies right now for energy conservation in a short period of time. I mean, it really is. Look at this. I mean, if you really think of the 3 big ones out there, you got the ice storm of about 10 years ago. You got the California Enron fiasco of several years ago. And you got Juneau last April. I mean, we really did something great there. My fear is that by April 16th, 2009, that our energy consumption electrically is going to be above where we were last year. That we're, you know, just a couple weeks ago, we were 10% below what we were last year. Now I heard we're 8%. We're climbing like crazy. I mean, I know it wasn't fun for some of the measures people were undertaking in their buildings to reduce energy last spring, but it worked. And I think that we could probably build on that and find some other ways that we could keep going down this path and see how much energy can we really save. Keep it up. This was good. This isn't good. We're going backwards in our value in our buildings. If we go back a couple hundred years, first Alaskans were putting us to shame. They were building 5-star plus before we ever had them, and they were real 5-star plus houses. I mean, you give me a sod house that had a minimum R value, resistance to heat flow of 20. Your new 5-star house doesn't come close. So we have to do better. I mean, this is like a wall of shame as far as R value. They might look good. They might have curb appeal. But sooner or later, are you going to be able to afford to keep conditioning them? I mean, I'm going to say that we need to start looking at our 50 walls, our 100 roofs. You can't put enough R value in. When someone says, start penciling out the numbers, where's the payback? How do you know what it's going to cost down the road? How long is the building going to last? R15 is nothing to be proud of. I've been looking for magic beans for a long time. I think some of you have too. Because magic beans are a lot easier than fixing the problem. You know, I keep wanting to plant a magic bean in the backyard and have energy security, energy efficiency, great indoor air quality in my building. But I haven't found the right beans yet. The only 3 things that I see out there that we can really impact and change are the structure, the systems, and the behavior. And tonight I'm mainly going to push on the structure and a little bit of behavior, or a fair amount. And I'm really not going to touch on systems yet. That'll come down the road. Because maybe in another few years, I'm going to ask you now to reconsider what you're doing with the systems. But I think we can take this in incremental steps and first take on structure and get our usage way down. So we have a couple thousand of these in Juneau, and probably a lot more than that around Southeast. This is your typical 1970s home in Juneau. It could be anywhere in Mindenhaven. You know, this is a perfect house for an energy retrofit. I modeled this house a few weeks ago. We tested this house. And so bear with me. I can't keep up. It's kind of like the fresh fish prices when I go to restaurants. I'm using $4.83 a gallon right now for heating oil. And that's 49 cents more than the price was Tuesday for a $400 purchase in Juneau. So bear with me. There's a few pennies that were going to be a little high. So your typical home and this would be our median home because this is right there in the vintage where we are in Juneau, uses about 1,700 gallons of heating oil a year for hot water and space heating, and about 7,000 kilowatt hours. You got a regular energy or annual energy bill of about $6,000. This would actually be $5,800 as of this week's prices. Okay, so when I did it, $6,300. But here's some of the numbers that kind of grab me. 23,000 plus in greenhouse gas emissions every year from your house. You need a design, you need 42,000 BTUs every hour to create comfort come January. And I throw out the coldest 2.5 percentile of our weather. So I use 97.5% of our coldest weather as far as the design temperature. This is your net heat that you need to generate in a building. I don't know how to start phrasing this or how to start changing. I've been looking at a couple of different ways. And is it cost per square foot? Is it cost per occupant? Is it cost per cubic foot of a building? Somehow or another, we have to figure out a target that gets people's attention, that they can then grasp this and say, yeah, I want this bill to be lower. I want this to be different. So our median house is $3.67 a square foot. And you could go a lot further. I mean, there's houses that are twice and 3 times as energy intensive in Juneau. I mean, if you have an older home downtown, you could be looking at far more expensive numbers in greenhouse gases and energy bills. So for this, I'm going to call this, let's take on the structure first, structure only, and I'm only going to look at the floor, your walls, your window, and your ceiling, and the air leakage. I'm not going to look at your heating system or your hot water system at all. You know, and typically so many of our houses, those are out in the garage. It's not a great spot for them, but they're out in the garage, and we can come to deal with that later. So this house, 25 BTUs per square foot. Now that's what we'll look at. We're going to throw out heat and hot water. So this is my, my discussion for us, is that how do we take a 30-year-old house and for $20 per square foot or less, I got a price from one contractor, and I talked to 2 contractors the last couple of weeks about some pricing on some scenarios of a simple retrofit, and but a very energy-minded retrofit, and no fanciness. There's no corian, there's no granite, there's no slate entry. This is high-performance walls, super high-performance windows, better than probably what any one of us has right now in our homes, and painted T111 siding. Okay, so it's a bare bones system as far as now the deepest energy reduction I can get and take a building down to 10 BTUs per square foot. So when we started this house, it had a 1,280 square feet of living space. It had about a 480 square foot garage. So altogether, 1,720 square feet. If we added up all the holes that you could never close in that building, come the Taku winds or anything, it's about 10.5 inches by 16 inches that are open 24/7, 365. You can't close those holes because they're unintentional. They're just all over the place. It had 2x4 walls with R11 bat. It had 2 layers of insulation because it had been re-insulated over the years in the attic. It had an R19 bat and an R11 bat inside there. And it had a series of double pane windows and sliding glass doors. And altogether, they were, you know, they're not the great windows, but they're what we had 30-something years ago. So we're going to come in and we're going to retrofit this house. We're going to change all the windows out. We're going to leave the walls alone. We're going to put super high performance windows in. A U value of 0.2. And our minimum requirement, so the lower the U, the better the performance. The higher the R, the greater the resistance to heat flow. But window manufacturers wouldn't want to let you know their R value because you think they're too crummy. So they changed to U value. So 0.2. Single pane, so our windows that we're probably buying in town right now are probably 0.3 something. So this is about a third better than what we're buying right now. This would be an R5 window if you want to look at R value. We're going to leave the walls alone except on the outside. We're going to put something like tar paper or Tyvek or Typar. It needs a new rain gear. We're going to put some new rain gear over the existing T111. And then I'm going to ask to think about 2 layers of 3-inch foam. So 6 inches of foam on the outside of these walls. Some furring strips and some new T111. So I'm going to take some rigid insulation from the top of your walls and go all the way down to the top of the foundation. I'm going to go inside your crawl space and I'm going to put rigid foam from the underside of your plywood floor all the way down to the top of the footing. You had the new windows. We're going to come in and we're going to fold back the fiberglass in the attic, and we're going to air seal all the cracks from the partition walls. We're going to air seal the plumbing, the wiring, the fluid that's coming through there. We're going to put the insulation back and add a couple more bats. Take the ceiling only up to R50, barely more than what we're required right now in Juneau by our thermal standard. Well, we took that with this air seating, we took that house from 164 square inches of opening all the time down to 26.5 inches. And we got the house so tight now that we need to add ventilation. We need to add people ventilation. So we're going to put a heat recovery ventilation system in this building. And it could go in the crawl space, because now the crawl space is part of the living space. This building's gotten bigger. When we started this, the crawl space was cold, wet. It wasn't part of the living space. It wasn't part of the conditioned building. But we've brought it indoors now. So we have an extra 4,000 or 5,000 cubic feet that we've added that are going to be part of the conditioning load of this building. But that also becomes a mechanical raceway for us and a chase. And we can, if that's the only location, we're going to put a heat recovery ventilation system in there. And it's going to be a real minor system. It might only have one port coming in supplying air. It might only have one port exhausting air. But with this device, as we're exhausting air, we can recapture 67% of the heat on that outside airstream and put it back in to preheat our incoming outdoor air. So we've got the whole building. We've got people ventilation. We've got a great enclosure. And this is what I think we need to go first, is first take on the structure and see where it goes. The one price I got from a contractor was just under $18 a square foot. So on that 1,700 and, what is it, 80 square, 20 square feet, about a $30,000 job to take a building down like this. Here's what your building will look like after this retrofit. We were at $6,300, $6,400 a year. We're now down to $3,000 a year. You were burning 1,700 gallons of heating oil a year for heating hot water. Now we're down to about, what, 400 and something. We were doing about 24,000 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions. We're down to 18,000. No, we were 24. Now we're down to 9. We were 42,000 BTUs per hour in January. Now we've cut that down by 3. Well, we were $3.67 to start with. Now we're down to $1.78, 10 BTUs per square foot. You know, conservation never goes obsolete. This will work down the road. So before, our walls and the air leakage were the greatest energy components and losses of this building. And now they're real low, and it's hot water is the biggest expense. So we have some real improvements waiting for us when the technology is ready. The technology isn't quite ready yet, I don't think, for systems. There's some great things coming, but we're not quite there. A few more years. I think the same thing with transportation. We're going to see some great inroads in how we have, as far as our vehicles and electric cars, who knows? So $20,000, borrow that. 15-year note, 0 down, 7%. Oh, because Alaska Housing Finance Corporation has this for you. They already have available for you, for all of us in Alaska, this new second home loan for energy conservation. So this is available. You take that $20,000, pay the contractor. Your first monthly, your original monthly bills were $526 a month. That was for space heating, hot water, lights, and appliances. Now you have your bills now are $256 a month for heat, hot water, and appliances. You got a $180 note. You've got $90 in your pocket every month. And you've also reduced the greenhouse gases by almost 3. It's money wisely spent. Now I know that I told you it cost $30,000. Well, if you could find an energy rater, and I know those are about, you know, it's like winning on or getting on the Wheel of Fortune. I realize that. I know a little bit about that. If I didn't return any of your phone calls or emails over the last 6 months, I apologize right now. But unbelievable amount of folks wanting an energy rating. And HFC is doing what they can to get more and more raters out there. But we also need to get more and more contractors out there that knew how to do the work. But if you had this Minden Haven house and it came in at 2 stars right off the bat, 2 plus 3, 3 plus 4, 4 plus, that's 5-step increase. That's worth $10,000. So this $30,000 job, if you played and you could find that energy rater, you got $10,000 off and you're borrowing that $20,000. That makes it pretty cost effective. That put $90 in your pocket every month. All we're going to do, we're going to replace your windows. We're going to come up in the attic. We're going to pull that back again. We're going to air seal it. You're going to get really thick walls. but your crawl space is so nice you'd be able to take a nap in it every weekend. You know, that's my description of an acceptable crawl space. Will you go down there and take a nap every weekend? If it isn't, you don't have a good crawl space. Just in case you couldn't find an energy rater, take the $30,000 and do it on your own. Because there's a whole bunch of people that have called up and I say, it's smart money. Don't wait for a rating. Do it yourself. It'll still pay back. And here it is. If you don't get the $10,000 back and you go through this whole scenario, it won't cost you any more per month. You won't have $90 in your pocket because you couldn't find the rater. But it won't cost you any more. It's still doing the right thing. If for some reason that you'd already changed over to electric, you're even money ahead. We were at $3,000. If you took this retrofit, the same thing we just did, but you didn't have an oil boiler, you had electric baseboard, you're looking at now $1.36 per square foot per year versus that $3.67. So, I mean, if you have electric, you're looking good, and you're not putting out 9,000 pounds of greenhouse gases. You're only putting out 258 or so. Great. I mean, how could you be? I mean, we're so lucky to have hydropower in Southeast Alaska. I mean, this is the greatest, but we don't have the capacity, right? We all can't change over to electric. And you know, I've talked a couple of times, and every once in a while I broach the subject with the utilities. I go, well, if we reduced our consumption by 50%, could we all jump over? Well, no one's saying anything right now, but I'll bet we'd have a lot more chances of more of us joining the hydro club and getting off of oil, whatever we're burning. Down the road, I'm going to think systems are going to come next. Oh, there's some cool stuff coming out there right now. You know, we have a builder that put in a test house about a year ago in Juneau, and we're trying the first in Alaska, this all-climate heat pump, air-to-air. Now, some of you have been around for a long time. We tried air-to-air heat pumps before in Juneau. Remember, that was 25 years ago, and it failed miserably. They all went to the landfill. But the technology has improved. And this heat pump that's working out there is working really, really well. It's got a coefficient of performance of about 2 to 1, so that means for every dollar you spend, you're getting $2 back in energy. It's expensive, and it's forced air. And most of us don't have buildings that have been constructed with a ductwork system for forced air. We're primarily a hydronic, heating hot water. So there's a real drawback there. If you have a forced air heating system, there's some cool technology out there. It's expensive. There's some other emerging technologies coming. One is it's called the CO2 hot water heat pump. It's coming out of Japan. It's going to use carbon dioxide, the greenhouse gas, as the refrigerant for this device. And I just told you about the air-to-air heat pump with a COP, a coefficient of performance of 2 to 1. This Japanese hot water heat pump has a 4 to 1. So you get $4 back in energy for every dollar you spend. There's some other technologies of maybe looking at reverse cycle chillers. And don't ask me to tell you how they work because I don't know. But I think they're going to work. The smart guys tell me they'll work here. But if we could now plug in a reverse cycle chiller and maybe connect that, because reverse cycle chiller will take 40-degree air and deliver about 149-degree water. You know, if you're hot water baseboard, you need 180-degree water, so it's not quite enough. So maybe we could, and this reverse cycle chiller is only $3,200 in the box right now. So you take this $3,200 box, install that, and then maybe couple that to an electric boiler. So now you can pick up from 149 to 180. You could be really green in the environmental sense versus the moldy sense. So, I mean, we can keep going lower and lower. We started at $3,600 or $6,400. Now we could be down to $1,600 a year for your space heating, hot water, and electricity. And less than $1 a square foot. I would like a house like that. A couple assumptions I think we should get off the table. You know, we have a tendency to keep building cities where there's no water. You know, we keep thinking that water is just going to come from somewhere. It's the same thing like power is, that we don't think that our buildings, like we keep using buildings that use more and more energy and more, because we put in more and more gizmos and more appliances. Maybe we have some efficiencies that we've included, but we keep adding more and more square footage. And that to think that we have this infinite supply of cheap water and energy, I don't think is the case. And that everything I keep reading, I'm sure all of you, that climate change is happening and that our weather patterns are probably less than predictable than what we've used historically, and that maybe mudslides or avalanche or ice storms, who knows what's going to occur, but any type of natural disaster like that really impacts the affordability of housing. And then to look at that energy use is neutral, that I think we have to think that, no, it's not. I mean, again, when do we look at, how is the price of geopolitical conflict or environmental concerns over extraction and transportation and consumption tied into the prices we're paying for energy right now? It seems like that's not. And we need to get that on board. And that new construction is going to save the day, that our new buildings are more energy efficient than ever. The new buildings that are exceeding our thermal standards, it's not true. Our new buildings are using more energy than our older existing buildings. Our old buildings used about 50 BTUs per square foot, but our new buildings are using about 35 to 40. But they're bigger, so they're using even more. This is not the time to not pay attention to new construction and energy efficiency and increasing the requirements for thermal performance. We need to keep doing that, but we also have to look at how many existing structures we have out there and how much of an impact we can make by reducing the energy needs of those buildings. I mean, that's our biggest segment of housing. 85% of the buildings in America, this is like the biggest fixed capital costs we have, right? And it's one of the slowest turnovers we have in structures. We need to now take a look back at our existing buildings and not throw them away, is to rehab them and bring them back into the future. Bring them more energy efficient than our new buildings. This is where I think we need to be looking at. Give you an idea of where we are thermally. This is our same Minden Haven house. 1,280 square feet of house. You know, if you build to the minimum thermal standards that the CBJ has on a handout, you're going to need 16 BTUs per square foot, and that your design temperature will be 27,391 BTUs every hour come wintertime, and that you're probably looking at $347 a month just on hot water, space heating, lights, and appliances. We run across this a lot because a lot of folks they get the building permit, they take the cookie cutter sheet from the CBJ, they go down the building process, and during the project, someone says, oh, you should get this house energy rated. You should do this. You should do that. And sure as heck, then they go in at HFC under the Building Energy Efficiency Standard has a different thermal standard, and it's more than the CBJ. So then people get into this catch-22 of they've gone so far, and now what do they have to do to meet the targets? If you meet the B standard, and this is again the minimum amount of insulation, minimum air tightness, or you're looking at 13 BTUs per square foot. Wow. If the difference of this, and now what if a building lasts, well, I don't know, is 30 years too much to ask for a building to last? I mean, that might be the life of a mortgage. The difference of these 3 BTUs over that 30-year mortgage is $18,000 in savings. I mean, that's almost real money. If you come back down and think about 10 BTUs per square foot, that's another $18,000. It's $35,000, $37,000 in savings over 30 years by doing it right. I mean, it's not going to cost you $35,000 to do upgrades initially when you can do it in the beginning. When you come back after the fact, well, you're going to spend all of that because you've already got all those initial systems in. So we have thousands of homes in Juneau that deserve to be retrofitted. And hopefully we'll retrofit them down to the 10 BTU number. If we go further south in Baja, Alaska, in Heidelberg, I'm using 5 BTUs per square foot. Ketchikan, I could probably go 5 BTUs per square foot. So Juneau, I think, is 10. Anchorage is easy tin. As we go further north, we'll probably have to increase it a little bit, but I think 10 is a good number to start there. We have to be careful as we start going down this road, because as you add more insulation conventionally, you end up with colder surfaces, and you have the thermal bridging. We really need to bring our buildings indoors, and the scenario I shared with you of putting the rigid insulation on the outside really brings your building indoors. There's really no need for a vapor retarder again, because now we've totally removed the potential for condensation occurring in your walls by putting so much insulation on the outside, versus your typical buildings in Juneau, residential buildings, in the wintertime are averaging about 2.5 degrees of reaching dew point on the inside of your plywood. So as you put more insulation on, you're getting cooler surfaces. That raises the moisture risk of an assembly. So plastic foam isn't the answer. That's just now what we have. You know, we need to have insulation that isn't petroleum and doesn't burn. I mean, those would be better improvements, but right now it's plastic foam. And ideally, if we could put together our assembly, we'd have a rain control layer, an air control layer, a vapor control layer, and a thermal control layer. And we're doing that now. We typically put on tar paper or Tyvek, maybe some Visqueen on the inside, and some fiberglass in the walls. And that's serving these purposes. But my friend Joe Stebrick would call this the perfect wall. And that we take a look at your structure, and then we put the control layers on. And the control layers are your air control, your vapor control, and now we're going to rain control. And then we're going to protect those layers and those control layers with rigid insulation. And so your layers, if you look at a typical building driving by anymore, and the weather barrier is out there for weeks and months at a time, flapping away, and then your siding is going to go over it. That's a really important piece of material, and it needs to be protected. And it's always being, moved and stressed around because of wind pressure, and it's not being completely sandwiched between. This assembly really does make a great change toward building durability. This was designed in the 1950s in Canada by an engineer by the name of Max Baker. It's not a new idea. It's just kind of new to us as energy becomes more expensive. The beauty about this system is that it works in almost any orientation. It works on a roof, a floor, and a wall. It really is the perfect wall. The behavior is going to be the hardest thing for people to say, more R. It's going to be more difficult. Yes, it is. There's pros and cons to all this. And the barriers are, it's pretty complex at this stage. We need to create a systematic approach so that we don't have to reinvent every building and redesign every building to make it energy efficient. We need to come up with a system that's easily integrated to any type of building, and that any type of contractor can now take on and reduce the thinking process as far as how do I get through this. The timing. I mean, on many retrofits, you have to move people out of the building, and that's expensive and it's also disruptive. With the outside insulation approach, you don't have to. I mean, it's much easier to keep folks in. We have to do a better job getting information out. I mean, there's a lot of information, but it's really disconnected out there to the individuals, the industry, and the industry is all of us. It's the banks, the appraisals, the realtors. I mean, it's everybody out there that's all part of this. And there's that 100 million decision makers. That's probably the biggest wild card we have out there, is changing our thought process of what we're going to do. And if we don't do it right, the unintended consequences are very big. But if we can reduce the cost, it's a big benefit. That's huge when we go down this. And we can make a building more resilient, more moisture tolerant. What was it, 20 years ago or so, Fritz Cove lost power for 3 days or so. I mean, I forget now what time of year, but I think it was kind of wintertime. What's going to happen if something happens and it isn't April and May when we had great weather? How long can you go without a lot of energy in your building? This is all the parts that we need to do to make these things more affordable, more durable, healthier. And son of a gun, we can now create a green core. We can, the green collar jobs, we can really do something. In the next 5 or 6 years, I see that we can now transform shelter in America so that we get to energy efficiency. It's coming. Trust me, it's coming. You know, in 1995 through 1990, almost 98, I sat on a committee that we were reevaluating the state thermal standards for Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. The standards were written in 1985. You know, in 1985, oil was $11.60 a barrel. And so we were playing with numbers, we were looking at stuff, and you know, by 1995, 1997, Alaska was the leader in the country as far as building diagnostics. You know, by then we had 4,000 or 5,000 houses that we had already tested blower door data. We knew the type of ventilation, infiltration rates. We had quite a depository of information. And that was right about when Energy Star was taking on Energy Star Homes. And they asked Alaska for the blower door test so they could start looking at how programs could work. And we were chuckling because we were already in this problem in 1995 that we hadn't addressed ventilation, that we were making houses tighter and we weren't addressing people ventilation. And if you look at the first column over there, V1, that was the first protocols for Energy Star homes. It has nothing to do with indoor air quality or ventilation. It had to do with getting it tighter, putting more insulation in, improving the windows. Version 2 still didn't have anything to do with ventilation or indoor air quality. It had to do with compact fluorescent lights and right-sizing heating systems and a better air barrier. Well, by then, EPA was in a world of hurt because they had a bunch of buildings that weren't performing very well, and they'd put a stamp on them. And sure as heck, they had to come up with a new plan. So they added a tag on, not that you had to. This was an additional stamp a builder or developer could do, and it was called the Air Plus, that you could now take on ventilation and filtration and source control by looking at safer materials as far as lower volatile organic compounds. Well, about what's coming next out of the EPA is version 3, and it's getting to smaller houses, and it's starting to do more and more of the things that we're talking about already. Minimize the thermal bridging, verifying ventilation, making sure the house doesn't have ice coming out of the floor, out of the windows, better water management. Those are all the things. And it's still not enough because what's coming next from EPA is called advanced new house construction. And insulation will be 50% beyond code. Still size, super efficient. It's coming. Just in the last couple of months, Vancouver, British Columbia, and it has a very similar climate to ours, within a couple of degrees, within 10 inches of rain, within a couple of miles per hour, just mandated and now requires that every new residential building constructed in Vancouver is solar ready. You don't have to put the solar in, but you're going to start putting through the roof and be ready for it. I don't think I'm saying for us to be solar ready, but I'm thinking that we need to be energy ready. So thank you. I appreciate it very much. Thanks for listening.
Okay. Any questions out there?
My first question is, where can we reference at least some of this? The thing that I'm most interested in is a concrete definition of what you called structure first standards for retrofitting a house. Is that available on a website or? If you send
if you send an email, we did build a 14-minute DVD a couple years ago that's on the UAS. It's available on the UAS server. I don't know the address now, but if you send an email, I can most certainly send you to the link, and it'll kind of go through some of the steps and processes of an outside insulation retrofit.
Okay, thank you.
You had talked about the house in Mindenhaven, and the crawl space in particular. We're taking advantage of the $10,000 offer from the state right now, and I have spent many hours in my crawl space. And you had mentioned putting the air exchanger down there. Now, all the older homes that I'm familiar with have multiple vents. What do you do with those? Because with as long as those are there, I'm not going to take a nap down there.
We close off the vents. We're now making stubby basements 3 feet tall. This is now part of the house. They're indoors. There's no insulation in the floor anymore. It's the wall system that we're insulating. So the crawl space now will be within about 5 degrees of your living room, and it'll be 5 degrees cooler than your living room and about 5% higher relative humidity than your living room.
Are you pouring a slab?
No, we're just putting a new vapor retarder down the ground and then insulating from the bottom of the plywood subfloor all the way down to the top of the footing.
Interesting. Thank you.
You mentioned the Hollowell air-to-air heat exchanger a little
I didn't
while
say
ago.
Hollowell, but I did say that, yeah, sure.
Yeah. My understanding is that the one they set up for experimentation here in Juneau failed this last winter.
It did?
And it was down for some time before they could get parts, so they don't have good data on it yet. So the jury is still out on that. However, I understand that Hollowell is also almost ready to release a air-to-water heating unit running on the same principle. Just a comment.
The Hollowell did fail, but it was, originally, we were lucky it failed because they shipped the wrong one. They shipped the large one that was larger than what the building needed. And if you get something that's too large like that, it tweaks the numbers because it has to go into defrost more, and the electrical consumption is very high. The right size came in, and this is being monitored all the time. So it did get back on in spring. We did lose the winter data. But the heat did not come on at all this summer. And this was a pretty cool summer. And looking at this, electric resistance didn't even come on in the house. And the engineers that are studying this say either something was wrong or the insulation is really working on the structure. And the builder went back, and the heat did not go on. The folks had not changed the thermostat. So it has a lot to do with the structure, much more so.
I have two questions. We're looking at retrofitting and upgrading our heating system to get off oil and get rid of the CO2 use. And so two questions. One is the air-to-water heat pump. Have you seen any of them work in climates such as ours? And the second question is, if you have a slab instead of a crawl space, is there anything you should be doing for heat loss there, or are you fine because you're on the ground?
The first one, no. I don't know of any air-to-water heat pumps that are available on the market for cold climates yet. The Japanese have been working on one for 7 years now. They bought the technology 7 years ago from Norway. So theirs isn't ready for the America yet. The air-to-water reverse cycle chiller is available out there. And again, I haven't looked in enough, but we happen to have a great energy engineer that has lived in Juneau and will live in Juneau again, Jim Rayfeld. And he is the one that's been feeding me information on the reverse cycle chiller. Jim is very keen that he thinks it's going to work very well for Juneau. And we're really hoping that someone will try it first, so I'm not the first guinea pig, because I'm really close. But I'd like to be the second guinea pig. I would, a slab, I would be looking at heat loss, and I would be asking you to expose the outside edge of it, insulate the edge of that concrete slab, because it's a radiator. I mean, my friend John Straub would say if someone came from another planet down to North America, and they would look at the cantilevered concrete decks we have out of apartment buildings, hotels, and concrete, he thinks that someone from another planet would say, this country has too much heat and they must be trying to get rid of it. So yeah, insulate that.
Yes, Markham, on the basement insulation, we have foam block construction. Is that adequate ventilation or insulation, or should be more foam added to that inside?
More foam. You're talking foam Lego blocks kind of thing?
Yeah, foam and concrete.
That's equivalent to just a little bit better than a plain 2x6 wall insulated with R21 bat. If you have 2 inches, I mean, concrete has no R value. 8 inches of concrete has a total R value of about 1.8. So now you've got 4 inches of foam probably, R20, and then the foam. So it's about an R21 wall. all together with an 8-inch concrete wall with 2 inches of foam on the outside and 2 inches of foam on the inside. I would offer to add more rigid foam or rigid insulation to the exterior of that.
Now, this is the foundation,
Oh, just the foundation, not
Yeah.
the walls.
not the wall, the foundation.
It depends on what how that connection is with the building. If it's a crawl space
Yes,
and the crawl space is conditioned, or I mean crawl space, there's no floor insulation.
no floor insulation.
In the long run, I'd offer to or suggest to add more insulation either to the. Now it sounds like this house is building's up. I'd add more insulation to the inside.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions.
Super.
We already had the guy come in, do the test on our house. It's been about a month, maybe longer, my wife says. How long do we have to wait before we get anything back?
And went back by what? I mean, back from HFC?
Yeah.
Back, I can't tell you that. You know,
We don't know what he found. You know, he left, you know, he took the stuff, he told us kind of what he did, but we're waiting for some sort of something coming back.
this is from the energy rater to you.
Yeah.
You know, ideally, you should have something within a week or two, couple weeks. And now I'm the worst guy out there because someone might wait months for me. That's each individual. I don't know. It's changing now. If you've been looking around, they took all the names of the raters off the web this past week. You can't find a name for a rater out there. So what AHFC is doing now is that you apply right to AHFC on the web, and that they will assign a rater. And if there's not a rater in that community, they're going to now look and say, there's 10 buildings ready to go. We will fly someone there. It's just like any other business. I don't know how each person operates, so I can't answer that. I mean, I hope you don't have to wait very much longer.
The other question I have is, you mentioned about the insulation of the foundation, and you know, a lot of the houses, mine in particular, was built over the top of muskeg and whatever, and so the water level is pretty high, and I had to put a sump underneath there in order to keep the water out. Well, you know, you put that insulation in, it's not going to be 5 degrees between the up part of the house and underneath there, because you got to open it up for the sump.
We have solutions for buildings like that. I'm also in the muskeg. Instead of now bringing that, you know, with water issues, we have to have a different strategy. So if I have high water table, I would not be insulating the foundation walls. I would insulate the floor fully with fiberglass, and then I would put rigid insulation below the floor joist to now decouple the floor joist from that damp environment. That'll bring your floor joist indoors. It'll warm your floor, lower the moisture content of that floor. That's the place to do it. Just like you would a plywood below the floor joist, it would be rigid insulation. That would help that. And then it'll also help with the moisture.
Would you recommend that for a house on pilings instead of foundation?
Absolutely. Every time.
Soft insulation and then hardboard?
No, I wouldn't know if I'd put hardboard. I mean, why?
I mean hard insulation?
Hard insulation. Fill that the floor joist up with fully with fiberglass or whatever type of insulation you're using, and then for a thermal break, rigid insulation below the floor joist. And I'd offer never ever, if you're ever putting insulation like that below a floor joist, do not tape seal those foam joints at all. Your plywood subfloor is the pressure boundary. That's what you want tight, not the rigid insulation below the floor joist. And ideally, when you're breaking that foam, the panels, you know, carpenters think that every panel is a structural component. It would be better to break that over the middle of a cavity so that any gaps have insulation above them. It'd be a slight improvement.
You talked a lot about, rather than the systems looking at the structure, and you did mention behavior, but behavior is huge. I lived off the grid for 3 years on a $500 solar system. And most of that was because I changed my behavior a whole lot. Part of that too was that the whole community had changed their behavior, and we were building, you know, our own houses and stuff. I'm wondering how much of this you think we could create co-ops to help do some of this retrofitting, so that we're, you know, helping each other out, or is it regulated to a point where you can't do it yourself?
No, you know, my personal belief in that is, you know, if I'm working with Juneau Douglas High School, I am asking them, let's not build new houses, let's retrofit existing houses. Let's now do a lot of training. There's some great training to be had with existing houses, and we're improving the community, each community. In rural Alaska, most certainly we're looking at working with the local individuals in each community and using that as a job training base to be ready for the next boom or whatever we have and use this as job skill training, and to have some pride and ownership too. And I think that is the ideal, and that's when I was asking last year for $3.5 billion, not for the labor. We need to invest that from our community sense, and then just have the help with materials.
Hey, Markham, you know, you've described construction tonight that's relatively sophisticated. You're talking about sophisticated systems, more expensive buildings. What do you do about as we put more of our resources into these buildings? That means that are either fewer are going to get built, perhaps will get smaller, but there still are a lot of folks that are essentially sleeping on park benches. So we ought to be thinking about the total distribution of all those dollars for, you know, the maximum benefit of all the people. And maybe it is that we have homes that are a little cooler and we buy a few more sweaters, but we house more people.
You know, I can't disagree with that, Bob, but also I look at the moisture risk of buildings as we've been building them. And as we use materials like a paper-faced gypsum board, and we now have our 3-bedroom house in Mindenhaven, and the kids have moved out, and now we're cooling down those back rooms. There's another bridge we're about ready to cross with indoor air quality and building durability. Those are balances that each community and each individual is going to have to weigh. But I think that, I used to think the energy efficiency was foremost. That's not the case anymore. I think that building durability is number one, health of the occupants in that building is number two, and then energy efficiency. And I do not believe that the way we're doing buildings offer durability and great indoor air quality. And I think that we need to revisit the way we put our structures together. And maybe it's not the super insulation, but even 1 inch of rigid insulation on the outside of a building will raise the dew point temperature of that plywood sheeting between 4 and 7 degrees Fahrenheit during the winter. And that might be enough not to have decay of our assemblies. So I think there's some scales that we could be looking at that we can improve buildings. And instead of I think where we're stuck with is that so much of our design and construction practices are by tradition and the business model of usual. And I think we need to revisit that as far as where are we going, what's the energy cost going to be, and how long are these buildings supposed to last? Maybe we need to make buildings that aren't as expensive and don't last as long. I don't know.
Hi, first of all, thanks so much for the presentation. It's been really interesting. Wish I had more competencies to go out and do the things you're suggesting. To that end, my question's kind of mundane, but you mentioned 4 control layers. Is that a rain layer, air layer, vapor layer, and thermal control layer? Can you give me an example on a house what exactly those components are or would be?
A rain control layer is something like tar paper or Tyvek. A vapor control layer is probably something like Visqueen, 6 mil polyethylene to the inside. An air control layer could be either one of those. And it's usually the builders don't understand what that layer is and where it goes. And then the thermal control layer would be your insulation. You know, every time you open, you know, I do it when I am an energy rater, so when I do a rating and a polyethylene isn't put in correctly, I rip it off from behind the drywall because it's not sealed on solid materials. Or I look at weather barriers on the outside. I mean, I look at our, the rainfall we have here. Let's just a guess that your siding stops 80% of the rain that hits the wall. 20% gets through that siding and is hitting your weather barrier. Anyone in my classes, I'm going to say the time to inspect a house is when the weather barrier is up, not when the countertops are down or the siding's up. The rain control layer is probably the most important control layer in our buildings. I mean, I look at buildings and I think really we have a few weeks a year of dryability in Juneau, Alaska. And it's when you have clear and cold weather. We can dry to the outside. Otherwise, we have very limited drying and we have mostly wetting of our buildings from rain and relative humidity. So ideally, I'd like to have these layers and combined together in one application or a series of layers that are protected between something like your structural sheeting and a rigid insulation so there's no movement, there's no stress on these materials. That would be my goal.
Yes, you mentioned earlier that you estimated it would be about $7 billion to retrofit all the homes in Alaska. The AHFC rebate program right now is committed $360 million. So that's about 5% of the money that would be needed to retrofit all the homes in Alaska. And the program is rather generous. If you get a rating and you do those things, you get quite a bit for it. But it means that 95% the people in Alaska are under the present funding aren't going to get access to that, although everyone is very excited about it. Do you think that the legislature will have the political will to continue to fund that and so such that that's going to actually be accessible to more than 5% of Alaskans?
Well, they started with 300 million. It's now 380 because 200 million of that is for low income. So 200 million is allocated for the housing authorities and weatherization providers in the state. 100 million is for 180 million is for the public without an income level. I just told AHFC last week that I think we should stop the program. That I think we need to stop it for a month or so and revisit what we've got going. Are we really going to save $380 million in energy? I don't think so. I think we'd be saving more energy if we had just taken that $380 million and bought everybody a new refrigerator and dishwasher or something like that. That's not very popular, I can tell you that. But I think that if, I think there's enough will and there's enough money that this program will go forward if it's successful. But if we spend $380 million and we don't do anything meaningful, that's a shame. And I hope that isn't what happens. But no one was prepared for this. I mean, I sit on a policy committee for AHFC, and we were sitting at the Baranoff, not that hotel room, in a meeting room last winter during session. And sure as heck, there was rumor that, you know, Mr. Hoffman was going to have this bill out, and going, that's great, like that's ever going to happen. And sure as heck, 2 months later, there was all this money, and let's go quick. And it would have been really great if that money came and we had 1 year to plan it and figure it out and to get a cadre of raters and performance-based contractors ready. And we don't. And I can honestly tell you that so many of the raters that, new raters I've trained and some of the other folks around the state, they're not prepared. They are not prepared. They don't understand buildings yet. It takes a while, and it's a lot of training. So we've got a lot of hiccups ahead of us as far as energy efficiency in this program. But sure as heck, there's a lot of folks trying to make it work.
You were talking about sealing the walls of the building in an envelope, putting the insulation on the outside of the existing building, and then putting on a new barrier on the outside of that. I've been going back and forth between going on the outside or going on the inside of the walls for a retrofit. If I were to insulate on the inside of the walls, then I can assume then that I might still have a problem with decay on the outside barrier. And what you're saying is if I put my insulation on the outside of my walls and then a new barrier, then it's going to move the dew point out away from the existing walls, and so I should not have a decay problem in my walls if I indeed go on the outside.
You would not have one due to wintertime condensation. If you did something silly like had a forced air heating system that was pressurizing the building or some other things, yes, you could still destroy a building. but it won't be because of air leakage and dew point temperatures in the assembly. Now, we have to be a little careful. Where my modeling gives me the most comfort is that I want more insulation on the outside than I do have in my existing walls. I don't want equal. So if you have a 2x4 wall, I'm pretty comfortable putting R20 on the outside. But when I have a 2x6 wall with R20, I need to get more outside. I need to make sure I get that dew point further away, because if you don't have enough, it's condensing on the outside of the plywood and it's trapped right there. I need to get it out into the rigid insulation beyond the building. And so we typically model each assembly.
Okay, I think this will be the last question.
So if we decide, let's go ahead and do this total retrofit, $30,000 plan, whatever. What's the best way to approach that? Should we get an architect, or can we be comfortable with the contractor that we find, that he's going to know, hey, I saw this great plan and we want to put this insulation on the outside, new windows and the U2 windows or whatever, or should we call you and have you come over to the house and figure it all out for us?
I don't think we have a contractor base ready yet for this. Okay, I think there's some builders that could make this leap right now. You know, they've been thinking about it. They most certainly have the talent, but are they on the job? You know, we have some retrofits going right now like this, and you know, it's unfortunate you get the crews. Where was the adult supervisionist? How we phrase that. You know, it's a pretty powerful tool out there, I can tell you. It's going to be a transition as we transform the workforce. I mean, we're not quite there yet, and it'd been really great if we had trained for a year workforce. And right now there's training going in Juneau for workforce, for performance-based contracting today and tomorrow. So there's a lot of this going on right now, but not enough and not fast enough.
Is there any classes we can take at UAS?
The question is, are there any classes that you can take at UAS?
Lots, Dan, lots.
Okay.
They're all good, too.
I had an enthusiastic person who wants to ask one more question.
It's great to put forward the idea of waiting, but actually the money is there now, and it's probably going to get spent, just like you realize. And so are there minimum, because we had someone come in and look at the windows, and they said, oh, you know, given your energy efficiency rating, which gives you points and how many points you get for each thing you do, it looked to me like, oh, put the windows in, and you know, R3 was fine, R3.5. There wasn't any kind of direction. So do you have sort of a minimum specifications that you could put out there on the UAS website or something that people can say, okay, if I'm doing this, this is really what I should be looking for?
Can I tell you right now, please? Spend as much as you can. If you have to phase in a project, do that. This fall, a new window is hitting the market, and it's revolutionizing windows. Silicon Valley is getting into building materials. They have changed sheetrock and they've changed windows, and they're just selling the technology. I just had a student get a price back from a manufacturer just last week. R9.6 overall for windows. George says, I mean, that's an incredible window, isn't it, George? The U value is 0.12. I was looking at 0.2 windows when I modeled this house, but 0.12 is available, and it's an insulated fiberglass frame with a double-coated heat mirror glazing with krypton gas. Okay? And the price that I was looking at on this quote was $35 per square foot before freight for the windows. But that's better than most of our walls.
That's, I think, a good place to stop.
Thank you.
Thanks, Markham, for a great performance.